So 1 year ago today, the final flight out of the Kabul, Afghanistan Airport by U.S. military forces, marking the end of that 20-year war. What's happened in that country since then is a mess, to say the least. The Taliban lied about any promises to improve its standing in the international community once the U.S. and our allied partners withdrew. Tonight, the first of a two-part in-depth report, a closer look at the aftermath in Afghanistan, what has changed in 12 months. We all watched the life and death drama play out at the Kabul airport a year ago, the final chapter that was, by all accounts, a disaster. 13 U.S. soldiers died in a suicide bomb blast trying to manage this mass of humanity. A tragic end to 20 years of war spanning 4 U.S. presidential administrations.
We were shocked that Kabul fell so quickly. Everyone was shocked. In retrospect, maybe we shouldn't have been, but it was a shock.
Skylar Forster is an expert in geopolitics, a former Air Force Academy instructor who also works closely with the World Affairs Council here in Colorado Springs. He, along with his wife Janet, are intimately involved in what is happening in Afghanistan and the humanitarian effort that is going on right now in Colorado Springs to help those who had no choice but to leave their homeland.
The humanitarian crisis in that country is calamitous.
And that's just the beginning. When the new Taliban regime came into power, what was old was new again. Women, once again, relegated to second-class status. Leadership reneged on their promise to include women in their cabinet. Women no longer working in government, period. Secondary schools for girls closed. Media freedoms rolled back. Basically, an economy in ruin. Billions of their assets frozen in banks in the U.S. and Europe. No money being printed. A cash and barter economy. International humanitarian aid has dried up. Old hardliners running a country with no accountability, hell-bent on arresting, imprisoning, torturing, or killing anyone who worked alongside the U.S. and our partners.
You've got the ideologues at the top, but you've also got a lot of fighters who are now running things on the local and municipal level. They're the cops, they're the sheriffs, they're the mayors, they're the whatever that are at the local level. They've been fighters for 20 years. They don't know anything about governing.
The United Nations estimates that 97% of Afghans don't have enough food. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International report it's become so bad that families are going to unthinkable extremes just to eat.
A mother sells her 13-year-old daughter for marriage to a Taliban official for some money. So they have money to eat and figures, well, at least my daughter's not going to go hungry.
In Washington, and under pressure from these international aid groups, the Biden administration is trying to carve out a $3 billion relief fund from those frozen Afghan assets, but they have to deal with a corrupt government on the receiving end of that aid.
But the problem is, how do you make sure that money gets to the people who need it?
And another problem in Washington, D.C. is what to do with the 200 or so Afghan families living here in Colorado Springs, dozens across the country, in trying to streamline legislation that's already being considered in Congress, the Afghan Adjustment Act, trying to speed up the process of permanent residency for these folks. Now, they do have access to benefits, but for only 2 years. After that, it's anybody's guess, and the clock is ticking.
They don't have asylum status, they don't have refugee status, and they theoretically can be deported within 2 years.
And he sees no urgency in Washington to get this passed. And with no U.S. diplomatic representation in Kabul, the backlog of processing in Afghanistan is stalled as well. Meantime, local organizations like Lutheran Family Services and Catholic Charities have taken these Afghan families under their care.
Largely, the people that we've worked with so far have been so grateful, so gracious, and so happy to have friends, because the way we look at it is we are friends with these people, and they're new people in our community we hope will be here for good.
She says they communicate with their families back home. The Forsters are working with their connections in the Defense Department and elsewhere to bring more of their family members to the United States. They told me the one word they used to describe these families: resilient.
Now, the Forresters say these are intelligent people, not to be underestimated, highly skilled, who they just want an opportunity. The Forresters and these Afghan families, they're fighting for this story to be told in hopes that these people who fought alongside us are not relegated to a footnote in history. Tomorrow night, in the second part of my in-depth report, Aftermath in Afghanistan, one-on-one with a former Afghan Air Force pilot who's trying to start a new life here in Colorado Springs. I'll have his story of heartbreak and hope.